Leeds United was born from the ashes of another club. In 1919, Leeds City was forcibly disbanded. The Football League accused them of making illegal payments to players during the First World War. It was a harsh punishment. The city of Leeds was left without a major football team. A void was created, but in the smoky rooms of the Salem Chapel, a new club was planned. On October 17, 1919, Leeds United was officially formed. They were given a place in the Midland League. They also took over the empty stadium at Elland Road. A new story was about to begin for football in West Yorkshire. The early years were a struggle. Leeds United had to fight for everything. They were elected to the Football League in 1920, starting in the second division. The club moved between the top two divisions for decades. There was no real stability. Great players came and went, like the legendary John Charles. He was a giant of a man who could play as a world-class centre-forward or centre-back. But even he could not bring sustained success to Elland Road. The club lacked a clear identity. They were just another team trying to survive. The famous all-white kit had not yet been adopted. The future was uncertain. This period was defined by inconsistency. They would win promotion to the First Division, only to be relegated a few seasons later. It was a cycle of hope and disappointment. The fans, who gathered on the terraces of Elland Road, were loyal. They endured the cold Yorkshire winters, hoping for a hero. They were waiting for someone to arrive and change their fortunes forever. The potential was there. The city was big enough. The support was passionate enough. But the club needed a visionary. It needed a leader who could build something special, something lasting. That man was on his way. The club's identity was yet to be forged. Before the 1960s, Leeds United wore blue and gold. They were not the formidable force they would become. They were just another northern club with a passionate following and a history of ups and downs. The foundations were being laid brick by brick, season by season, but the structure was weak. It needed a new architect. The pre-Revie era was a long and often difficult chapter. It was the necessary prologue to the main event. A quiet period before the storm was about to break over English football, with Elland Road at its very epicentre. In March 1961, Don Revie was appointed as player manager. Leeds were in the second division, and they were in trouble. Relegation to the third division was a real possibility. The club was at its lowest ebb. Revie was a well-known forward, but he was an unproven manager. He saw the challenge ahead. He knew that everything needed to change. He had a vision. He wanted to build a dynasty. He started by changing the club's kit from blue and gold to all white, inspired by the great Real Madrid. It was a statement of intent. He wanted his team to play and look like champions. Revie's methods were revolutionary for their time. He introduced a new level of professionalism. He focused on scouting, creating detailed dossiers on opposition teams. This was unheard of back then. He fostered a deep sense of family and loyalty within the squad. The players were his boys. He brought in young, hungry talent like Billy Bremner, Norman Hunter and Jack Charlton. They were tough, uncompromising players. They embodied the spirit that Revie wanted. He built the team from the back, creating a defence that was feared throughout the league. They were hard to play against and even harder to beat. The transformation was swift and dramatic. In 1964, Leeds United won the second division title and were promoted to the top flight. They almost won the First Division and the FA Cup in their very first season back. They finished second in the league on goal average and lost the cup final to Liverpool in extra time. It was a bitter disappointment, but it showed how far they had come. A new power had arrived in English football. Revie had created a machine, a relentless, organised and incredibly talented team that knew how to win. They were not always loved, but they were always respected. The team became known for its aggressive, physical style. Opponents called them Dirty Leeds, but they were much more than that. They had immense skill. Johnny Giles pulled the strings in midfield. Eddie Gray was a wizard on the wing. Peter Lorimer had one of the hardest shots in the game. Revie had blended steel with style. He created a mentality that they were against the world. It was us against them. This siege mentality made them stronger. It bonded the players and the fans together. Elland Road became a fortress. Don Revie had not just built a team, he had built an empire. Under Don Revie, Leeds United became a dominant force. The late 1960s and early 1970s were their golden age. They consistently challenged for every major honour. They won the First Division title in 1969 and again in 1974. They won the FA Cup in 1972, the club's centenary year. They also lifted the League Cup in 1968. The trophy cabinet at Elland Road began to fill up. The all-white kit became a symbol of excellence and intimidation. When teams saw Leeds United on the fixture list, they knew they were in for a battle. This was the Revie era in full flow. Their success was not limited to England. Revie had ambitions to conquer Europe. Leeds became a feared name on the continent. They reached the final of the European Cup Winners' Cup in 1973, controversially losing to AC Milan. They also won the Intercities Fairs Cup twice in 1968 and 1971. This competition was the forerunner to the UEFA Cup. These European campaigns were tough. They involved long journeys behind the Iron Curtain and brutal matches against hostile opponents. But Leeds thrived on it. They were built for the fight. Their reputation grew with every victory on foreign soil. The team was full of legends. Captain Billy Bremner was the heart and soul of the side. A small Scottish midfielder with immense talent and a fiery temper. Norman bites your legs. Hunter was the enforcer at the back. Jack Charlton was the towering World Cup winning centre-half. Alan Sniffer Clark was the clinical goal-scorer. Every player knew their job. They played for each other and for their manager. They were a band of brothers, united in their quest for glory. They were one of the greatest teams in the history of English football, even if they didn't win as many trophies as their dominance deserved. However, there was also a lot of heartbreak. Leeds finished as runners-up in the First Division 5 times under Revie. They lost 3 FA Cup finals. This led to a reputation for being the nearly men. But this only tells part of the story. To finish second so many times shows incredible consistency. It shows they were always there, always competing at the very highest level. The Revie era established Leeds United as a giant of the game. It set a standard that all future Leeds teams would be measured against. It was a time of glory, grit, and unforgettable drama. When Don Revie left to manage England in 1974, it marked the end of an era. His departure created a huge void. Replacing a legend is never easy. The club made a shocking choice. They appointed Brian Clough, one of Revie's fiercest critics. Clough had famously called the Leeds players cheats. It was a disastrous appointment. The players did not respect him. The dressing room was hostile. Clough lasted just 44 days. His short, chaotic reign was a sign of the turmoil to come. The stability that Revie had built was beginning to crumble. The empire was starting to show cracks. After Clough's exit, Jimmy Armfield took over. He managed to steer the club to the 1975 European Cup final. It was the biggest prize in club football. Leeds faced Bayern Munich in Paris, but the match was shrouded in controversy. Leeds had 2 strong penalty appeals turned down. A Peter Lorimer goal was disallowed for a debatable offside decision. The fans felt cheated. Riots erupted in the stadium after the 2-0 defeat. Leeds were banned from European competition. It was a bitter end to their European dream. It felt like the last stand of Revie's great team. The golden generation was growing old. The years that followed were a slow decline. The great players of the Revie era retired or moved on. The replacements were not of the same quality. The club slipped down the table. They were no longer challenging for titles. They were becoming a mid-table side. The fear factor was gone. Elland Road was no longer the fortress it once was. The atmosphere of success and invincibility had evaporated. The fans who had witnessed so much glory now had to get used to mediocrity. The club was adrift, searching for a new identity and a new hero. The decline culminated in relegation in 1982. After 18 years in the top flight, Leeds United were back in the second division. It was a huge blow for the club and the city. The wilderness years had begun. The 1980s were a dark time for Leeds. The club was plagued by financial problems and hooliganism. Success seemed a distant memory. The club went through a succession of managers, but none could replicate the magic of Revie. They were stuck in the second tier, a sleeping giant waiting to be woken. The road back to the top looked long and difficult. In 1988, Leeds United turned to Howard Wilkinson. He was a no-nonsense manager, a real disciplinarian, and folks called him Sergeant Wilco. He arrived with a clear plan, wanting to bring back the professionalism and winning mentality of the Revie era. He famously told the board he needed 5 years to win the first division, and well, he set about rebuilding the squad straight away. He signed Gordon Strachan, who quickly became the inspirational captain. He brought in tough defenders like Chris Fairclough and Mel Sterland, building a team in his own image-organised, hard-working and honestly just difficult to beat. Wilkinson's impact was immediate. In his first full season, 1989-90, Leeds won the second division title. After 8 long years, they were back in the top flight. The excitement, you could say, was back at Ellen Road. Wilkinson didn't stop there, though. He continued to strengthen his squad, signing goalkeeper John Lukic and the talented midfielder Gary McAllister. He also promoted a young David Batty from the youth team. But the key signing came in 1991, the arrival of French forward Eric Cantona, who added a real touch of genius to all that grit. Wilkinson had assembled all the pieces for a title challenge. The 1991-92 season was unforgettable. It was the last season of the old First Division before the Premier League came along. Leeds were locked in a tense title race with Manchester United, and the rivalry was absolutely fierce. The season went right down to the wire. Leeds held their nerve, beating Sheffield United to clinch the title, while Manchester United lost to Liverpool. The city of Leeds, honestly, just erupted in celebration. They were champions of England for the 3rd time. Wilkinson had delivered on his promise. He'd woken the sleeping giant. It was a remarkable achievement. The championship-winning midfield was legendary, made up of 4 players: Gordon Strachan, Gary McAllister, David Batty and Gary Speed. They were perfectly balanced. Strachan brought experience and creativity. McAllister had the passing range and set-piece delivery. Batty was the tough tackling enforcer, and Speed brought energy and goals from the left. They really were the engine room of Wilkinson's great side. The 1992 title win was a triumph of teamwork, discipline and shrewd management. It was, without doubt, another glorious chapter in the history of Leeds United, proving that the club could once again reach the summit of English football. After the highs of 1992, Leeds had another period of inconsistency. Howard Wilkinson was sacked in 1996, and George Graham came in and built a solid defensive team. But honestly, the football just wasn't exciting. The real change, though, came in 1998 when Graham left for Tottenham. His assistant, David O'Leary, was given the manager's job. O'Leary put his faith in a group of hugely talented young players coming through the club's academy. He built his team around youngsters like Jonathan Woodgate, Alan Smith, Harry Kewell and Ian Hart. It was, the start of a thrilling new era. Under O'Leary, and with chairman Peter Ridsdale spending big in the transfer market, Leeds began to challenge at the top of the Premier League. They played fast, attacking football. It was exciting to watch. Ridsdale famously said he was living the dream. He sanctioned big money signings like Rio Ferdinand for a British record £18 million, and later Mark Viduka and Robbie Keane. The team was full of stars. They qualified for the Champions League, Europe's elite competition. The good times were back at Elland Road, and the fans believed they were on the verge of another golden age. The peak of this era was the Champions League run in the 2000 to 2001 season. O'Leary's young guns went on a remarkable journey. They played against some of Europe's biggest clubs like Barcelona, AC Milan and Real Madrid. And well, they beat them. The atmosphere at Elland Road on European nights was absolutely electric. The team showed no fear. They reached the semi-finals where they faced Valencia. Unfortunately, the dream ended there. They lost 3-0 in Spain, but they had captured the imagination of the football world. It really felt like the start of something special. This team was built on youthful exuberance. Alan Smith was the local hero, a passionate and aggressive forward. Harry Kewell was the brilliant but injury-prone winger from Australia. Rio Ferdinand was a class act at the back, a Rolls-Royce of a defender. Mark Viduka was the powerful Australian striker who could hold up the ball and score crucial goals. They were backed by experienced players like Lucas Radebe, the South African captain known as the Chief. It was a fantastic blend of youth and experience. They had the talent to win trophies, but sadly, behind the scenes, a disaster was unfolding. The dream that Peter Ridsdale was living came at a huge cost. The club had spent money they did not have. The entire business model was a gamble. It was based on qualifying for the Champions League every single season. The television money from that competition was needed to pay the massive wages and transfer fees. For a couple of years the gamble worked, but in the 2001 to 2002 season, Leeds finished 5th in the Premier League. They missed out on the Champions League. Suddenly, the money dried up, the dream turned into a nightmare, the financial collapse was swift and brutal, the club was drowning in debt, reported to be over £100 million. They had to sell their best players to survive. The star-studded team was dismantled. Rio Ferdinand was sold to rivals Manchester United. Jonathan Woodgate was sold to Newcastle. Robbie Keane, Harry Kewell and Olivier Dacour all followed them out of the door. The team on the pitch got weaker and weaker. The fans watched in horror as their heroes were sold off one by one. The club was in a state of chaos. The chairman who had lived the dream was gone. The consequences were severe. On the pitch, results collapsed. The team went from being title challengers to relegation candidates in the space of 18 months. Several managers tried to stop the slide, but it was impossible. The club was in a death spiral. In May 2004, the inevitable happened. Leeds United were relegated from the Premier League. It was just 3 years after they had been in the Champions League semi-final. It was one of the most dramatic falls from grace in the history of English football. The years of overspending and reckless ambition had come at the ultimate price. The relegation was just the beginning of the pain. The club's financial problems were so bad that they went into administration. This meant they were docked points. The club was sold for a fraction of what it had been worth. The new owners had to deal with the legacy of debt. The fall was complete. Leeds United, one of England's biggest clubs, was broken. The fans who had cheered on Revie's legends and O'Leary's young guns now faced a very different reality. The fight was no longer for trophies, but for the very survival of their football club. Life outside the Premier League was tough. The Championship was a hard, unforgiving league. Leeds were a huge club with a massive stadium and fan base, but they were financially crippled. They were a big scalp for every team they played against. The first few seasons were a struggle. The club was a shadow of its former self. The remaining high-earning players left. The squad was made up of loan players, free transfers and youngsters. The glory days of European nights seemed a million miles away. The reality was cold Tuesday night games in towns across England. The lowest point was yet to come. At the end of the 2006 to 2007 season, the club's financial situation became critical again. They went into administration for a second time. As a penalty, the Football League docked them 10 points. This confirmed their relegation to League One, the third tier of English football. It was the first time in the club's entire history that they had fallen this low. For the fans, it was the ultimate humiliation. The mighty Leeds United, champions of England, were now in the same division as clubs like Yeovil Town and Cheltenham Town. Life in League One was a surreal experience. Elland Road, a stadium that had hosted World Cup and European Cup semi-finals, was now staging third-tier football. Despite the fall, the fans remained incredibly loyal. They still turned up in huge numbers, often outnumbering the home support at away games. This period forged a new bond between the supporters and the club. They'd hit rock bottom, but they were still there, singing loud and proud. Managers like Dennis Wise and Gary McAllister tried to get them promoted, but they fell short, often losing in the playoffs. The club was stuck in League One for 3 long seasons. It was a period of immense frustration. They started one season on minus 15 points due to their financial issues. The ownership of the club was unstable, with controversial figures like Ken Bates in charge. It felt like the club was trapped in a cycle of despair. But finally, on the last day of the 2009 to 2010 season, they achieved promotion back to the Championship. A dramatic victory against Bristol Rovers secured their return. It wasn't a league title or a European trophy, but for the fans who had been through so much, it felt just as good. After returning to the Championship, Leeds spent another decade in the footballing wilderness. The club was unstable. A series of different owners and managers came and went. There was no clear plan. The team often finished in mid-table. The fans grew restless. They longed for a return to the Premier League. They needed a saviour, someone to unite the club and give them hope again. In 2017, Andrea Radrizzani bought the club. The following year, he made the most important decision of his ownership. He appointed the legendary Argentine coach, Marcelo Bielsa. Bielsa's arrival changed everything. He was a world-renowned coach, a tactical genius who had influenced managers like Pep Guardiola. His decision to come to a championship club was a massive shock. He transformed the team immediately. He introduced a high-intensity, attacking style of play. The players became fitter than they had ever been. He was eccentric, famously sitting on a bucket on the touchline. The fans fell in love with him. He made them believe again. In his first season, they narrowly missed out on promotion in the playoffs. It was heartbreaking, but the progress was clear. In the 2019 to 2020 season, Bielsa finished the job. After a 16-year absence, Leeds United won the championship title and were promoted back to the Premier League. The city celebrated wildly. Bielsa had ended the years of pain. He had restored the club's pride. Their first season back in the top flight was a huge success. They played fearless football and finished in a brilliant 9th place. It seemed that Leeds were finally back where they belonged. Bielsa had not just won promotion, he had given the club back its identity. However, the story of Leeds United is never simple. The second season back in the Premier League was a difficult struggle. The high-intensity style led to injuries. The team leaked goals. In February 2022, with the team in a relegation battle, the club made the painful decision to sack Bielsa. It was a sad end to a magical era. Jesse Marsch came in and kept them up on the final day of the season, but the following year, they were relegated again. The journey continues, full of glory, grit, drama, and despair. That is the story of Leeds United, a constant, unpredictable cycle of hope and struggle.